Alright, Chapter 8 or Unit 8 is again a review of Unit 4, or it's kind of building on Unit 4. So today what we're going to do is review graphing points on a number line. We're also going to take a step towards more realistic numbers by the end of the lesson, but first let's just make sure we review the process of graphing points on a number line. Remember that if you were asked to graph to point 4, what you want to do is start at 0, and I purposely leave these unmarked, but you want to start from 0 and count 4 over, so 1, 2, 3, 4, which would be right on that spot there. If you wanted to plot the point -3, you start at 0. Remember, negative means to the left, so 1, 2, 3, and so you would put a point there. If you were plotting the point -1, again, starting from 0, you go 1 backwards, and you end up right there. Again, remember that the problems in this week's work will be plotted for you, so you got to count for yourself. Just make sure again that you're paying attention to your count, because there will be decimals in some of these, and you want to make sure you're kind of adjusting to the question. So if you miss it and you realize it's a whole number, just make sure you adjust your game plan to those questions. This quarter, though, we have been working with decimal values. Decimal values can be plotted on a number line as well, but let's build up to that skill before we dive in. One thing you need to make sure you know how to do, which I'm sure you do know how to do, is halves. Hopefully you've had experience cutting things in half. You should already have an idea of what a halfway point looks like. The good news is that you do not need to be exact, but you just have to learn to trust your instincts. The good news is that halfway points work the same for both positive and negative values, and so I will label all the halfway points on the graph. You might want to copy this and just kind of make your number line. I would pause the video, make this number line, and then label your -5, your 0, and your 5, so you can see what these things are. First off, in terms of going this direction, again, here's a line. Here's a line. Your halfway point would be about right there, and that would be 0.5, because again, that's in between 0 and 1. Here's 1, that's 2, so this would be about right here, and again, that would be 1.5. Here's 1 and 2, so again, somewhere in the middle, at least as middle as you can get, that would be 2.5. Again, somewhere around the middle, 3.5, somewhere around the middle, 4.5. Now the trick here is that these numbers are easy to tell, because you know how to count 1, 1.5, 1, 2, 3, 3.5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5. But it's when you go this way that you get caught up, because when people see this number, the first thing they want to think is that's -1, so that's -1.5. But remember, we're going that way. You don't want to count from this side, you want to count from 0, so that's actually -0.5. And then you hit -1, and then you take a half, so that's -1.5. And then you count 1, 2.5, which is -2.5, and then you count 1, 2, 3.5, which is -3.5, and then again you count 1, 2, 3, 4.5, which is -4.5. So notice I am counting up to the half and then adding the half. So if I was coming right here, I would go 1, 2, 3, and then a half. I don't go 1, 2.5. I go 1, 2.5 that way. So again, just making sure that you've got that idea down. But again, hopefully you copy that down, especially if you're going to be asking for help, because again, you need to make sure you have your part taken care of so I can assist you. So halves are pretty easy, but by experience, a quarter is a half of a half. So what this means is you can identify it by just saying, is that a half? And again, trusting your instincts and knowing what a half looks like, you can see if the point is somewhere in the middle or if it's not really in the middle. So in order to graph a quarter, you must remember that quarters switch sides on either side of 0. Again, let's just take a look. I'll label all the 0.25s on the positive side of the number line. So there's actually two 0.25s because you have two of them. So what we're looking at here is this is 0, and what I'm going to do instead of putting a point is I'm going to put a small line for my half. Alright, so draw this for yourself. Put bigger lines for your your 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then put a little small half line there. And what happens is that's 0.5. And then you go the halfway between those, which is 0.25. And this side over here would be 0.75. Alright, hold on, let me make sure that's what I'm doing. Yeah, it is. But either way, when you're talking quarters, The one that's closer to 0 is 0.25. The one that's further from 0 is 0.75. So I'm going to put the points there. I'm not going to label it because I definitely don't have enough room to do that. But just kind of make sure you understand that what I am doing is I'm saying that's the halfway point, and then half of that would be 0.25. Half of that would be 0.75. So this would be 1.25 and 1.75. Again, here, because that is 1.25, 1.75. So again, here, cut it in half. That would be your 0.25. That would be your 0.75. I'm just going to put a 2 and a 7 for 2.5 and 0.25 and 0.75. So again, between here, that's your halfway mark, dot, dot. This is your half of a half, which is a quarter, half of a half, which is a quarter. Again, those are all your spots that you're going to be looking at as you go through this. If you were going to this mark, you would count and go 1, 2, 3. That's not a half, but it's further than a half, so that'll be 0.75. Because that's your 0.5, so that'll be 0.75. Because it goes 25 cents, 50 cents, 75 cents, $1. Pretty much is how those work whenever you're doing that. All right. Going the other way is different though. We understand that's 0 and we have to start at 0. The halfway mark would be here. But remember, when you look at these 2 points, it's not 0.25, 0.75 because 0.25 is closer to 0. This would be your negative 0.25 and this would be your negative 0.75. Just so you understand, that's how it works. So again, your 0.25 is closer. It's 25, 50, 75, $1. 25, 50, 75, $1, and that's how you're counting. So that is easy enough there, but again, it's whenever you get to these that you have an issue. So I'm going to look real fast at 2 points. I'm going to look at this point, and I'm going to look at this point. If I was wanting to know what this point is, I count from 0, 1, 2, and notice I can't get to 3 because I jump over it. So it's 1, 2, and that would be 25, 50, 75. So that would be negative 2.75 because I went 2 full steps and then half and then another half, which is 0.75. If I wanted this line, I would go 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't count 5 because it's too far. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And since I'm hitting the first spot, that is your 4.25. So again, get a little bit of practice on that. It does definitely take practice. You got to make sure you know what's going on, but just make sure you're careful about that. Hold on real quick. I was supposed to do 0.25s anyway. Tenths. Tenths are easy to plot as long as you remember that the behavior of decimals flips around on a negative side, like I said earlier, whereas 0.1 would be closer to 0, 0.9 would be further from 0. So typically values that are plotted with a 0.1 or 0.9 are really, really, really close to the line. I'm sorry for using that repetitive way of saying it, but I want to stress that it's really, really, really close to the line. So notice that now that we've covered the concepts, let's look at some problems that you're going to see on your homework so we can get to the actual work that you're going to be doing. So the first set of problems is going to check your basic understanding of 0.1, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, and 0.9. Again, I'm not going to cover 0.1 and 0.9 because you'll see that they don't fit anything else. So it's kind of like a process of elimination. You know what halfway looks like, and you can kind of visualize what half of a half looks like, which would be these, which means if it's not the halfway point, if it's not the halfway twice, then it's got to be one of these two. So what you're going to do is it's going to pretty much give you this picture, and it's going to say which decimal makes most sense. So here's my 0. Locate your 0 first. So looking at this, that looks like half, and it's definitely not half. So to me, it would look like it's about a quarter, because again, if I was to cut this in half, that looks like the halfway point between the two halves. So this would be 0.75. And then it's going to say what is the value. And so knowing that this is 0.75, now you want to count. That is 1.75. Except there will be a box there for you to do that for yourself. This one here, again, if you're looking at the location of it starting from 0, that definitely looks like a halfway point. Again, trusting your instincts, that's definitely a halfway point, so that's a 0.5. Now use the number line to figure it out, so that's 1, 2, and a half, so it'll be 2.5. And again, that's all you're going to be doing on these questions. keep in mind again, if it's not a quarter, then it must be a tenth. So looking at this, this to me would be about the halfway point. And looking at the halfway point in this is definitely not in the middle of those two lines. Again, trusting your instincts, it's really close to this line here. So again, that can't be a 0.25, which means it's either got to be a 0.1 or a 0.9. And since it goes 1, actually, let's just make sure. If that's 0, that doesn't make sense to be a 0.9. 0.9 would be on this side because it would be really close to the other number, so that is a 0.1. So knowing that it's a 0.1, that number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 0.1. Again, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you see the actual decimal added on, which is your 0.1. Here, which decimal makes sense? Again, I think you kind of see this now. This is definitely not a tenth, because remember, tenths are really, really close. To me, that's definitely not a half or a tenth, so that's got to be one of the two quarters. And since 0 is on this side, and it's closer to 0, that's got to be a 0.25. Since that's a 0.25, now we just got to figure out the number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it goes, so it'll be 6.25. Again, that is your 0.25. This is your 6, so it's 6.25. Just like this is your 0.1, and this is your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's 5 plus the 0.1, which makes your 5.1. Again, looking at how this views, just trusting your instincts, I'm sure you can probably see it. This is definitely not a quarter because that's really close to that line, which means to me this is a 0.9. Again, that's a number there, and then it goes this way, which means it's really close to the next one. So that's a 0.9, and since you're going 1 before your 0.9, that means that it is 1.9. It can't be 2 because 2 is right there. So it's smaller than 2, bigger than 1, got to be 1.9. All right. Second portion of problems only uses the 0.5, the 0.25, and the 0.75, but it does look at both sides of 0. Just be sure to ask yourself if it's halfway. If not, it has to be a quarter. And remember to pay attention to what side of 0 you're looking at, because that's where you're counting from. So looking at this, again, trusting your instincts, you should be able to trust that that's a halfway point between these two marks. All right, so that's definitely a 0.5. Now the number, if that's 0, again, start from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 0.5 would be my number for that. Looking at this one, that's definitely not a halfway point. Again, that's not half, which means it's got to be either 0.25 or 0.75. Since it's closer to this side, that's got to be a 0.75 because it's closer to the next number. You know, if that's 1 and that's 2, it's closer to 2, so it's got to be higher. And so that's 1.75 would be the number that I'm looking at there. Same thing on the third one. Definitely not a half, but it's closer to 0, so that is your 0.25. And you go 1, 2, 3 before that, so it's 3.25. All right. And the last three you're going to see are going to be on the other side, but again, you just got to be careful. First off, I know this is either 0.25 or 0.75, but you want to remember what side of 0 you're on, so remember that this would be your 0.25, so that's actually a 0.75, and that's where you have to be careful. Again, it's closer to the next number. That's 1, 2, 3, and then more, so that would be 3.75. 3.25 would be here, 3.5 would be here, 3.75 there. Again, looking at this, it's definitely not a half, but it's closer to the 0, so that's 0.25. And since it is closer to 0 and we don't even jump, that means we don't even get to 1, so it's negative, I'm sorry, that should be negative 3.75, because you got to remember that negative part, but that'll be negative 0.25 because you're going that direction instead of that direction. 0.25 would be here, 0.75 would be here because you're going forward, but since we're going backwards, they are negative. And the last one before we wrap this up, that is definitely a half. Like I said, halves are easy to see once you get used to it. And then we count from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a half. So it's negative because we went left, 5.5. Just remember to take your time. Again, the problems give you feedback as reminders of what you got wrong. So what you want to do is make sure you look at the answer. And before you hit next question, look at the problem and make sure you can kind of see where they got that answer from. So if you didn't know that this was 5.5, then say, okay, can I make it 5.5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a half. Okay, I get it. Or if you didn't know this was negative 0.25, go to 0 and say, yep, that's right, because I went backwards, it's negative. But if you can train yourself to match what the answers are, then what you actually do is train yourself how to get the answer before you miss it. So other than that, make sure you answer the last question on the video, and talk to you later. Good luck.